So, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Schooled In. My name is John Lunn, aka Jonnychipz, and in this video series we take a deeper dive into some of the awesome cloud technology that's surrounding us. I'll be joined by fantastic people from out in that tech community who've kindly taken the time out of their day to come and school me in a particular tech topic. So whether you're watching this on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter or LinkedIn, thanks so much for tuning in. It's really appreciated. Please do take part in the chat below. Drop us a comment, a like and a subscribe. That would be absolutely awesome. Okay, so over the last few years, Kubernetes has gained more and more popularity amongst developers and IT pros alike for deployment of cloud-native applications. Now, for those of us that are maybe new to these concepts, getting started with a managed service offering of Kubernetes, something like Azure Kubernetes service, can seem a little bit like a dark art, and maybe you might not know where to start. So, well, as luck would have it, I'm super thrilled to be joined by Microsoft Azure customer engineer, blogger and podcaster, the awesome Kevin Evans, who today is going to school me in the AKS Bicep Accelerator. Hello, Mr. Evans. How are you doing?
How you doing, Johnny? Not too bad. Not too bad. It's Friday here. When we're recording this.
Yeah, it's a Friday. It's always good that it's a Friday, Kev. How's things with you, matey? How you doing? All good?
Oh, yeah, all good. It's just a million miles an hour at the moment, but just loving it, to be quite honest.
I was going to say, I said earlier on, it seems every time I go on the social medias, you're there. You're up to something at the minute, which is cool to see, to be honest. But I think there's a lot of knowledge that's being sort of sent out to the ether at the moment through community, and it's great to see you actively involved in a part of that, bud. So, look, we've got a great subject area to talk around today from a tech perspective, but I guess before we jump into that, do you want to give yourself a little bit more of a broader intro, let people know who you are, what you're up to, and set the scene for what we're going to be doing today?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, as Johnny said, I'm Kevin Evans, and I'm an Azure customer engineer at Microsoft here in the UK. I specialize in Azure infrastructure, but I'm also a cloud native advocate, and I also have a focus on cybersecurity as well. So all those good stuff that's rolled into one. We're going to look at basically the AKS Bicep Accelerator, right, which has been written by the team here in the UK, and it's all about getting an AKS, a managed service from Azure, so the Azure Kubernetes service deployed against CAF and WAF. So if you don't know what CAF is, it's the Cloud Adoption Framework, and WAF is the well-architected framework. So it could be a dev environment, right, to dip your toe in the pool, or something that's more production ready, right, and making sure you've got all those right resources surrounding that environment, that instance as well. So be that a container registry or a key vault, etc., in your networking, and how that AKS cluster is basically exposed to the internet, right, or into a network to be consumed as well.
Oh, that's good stuff. So, I mean, yeah, like for those that have been following my little journey on what I've been up to, certainly cloud native is an area that I've only really dabbled with from the skirted around, I suppose is best to say. I'm looking at sort of deploying those cloud native applications into an Azure platform. Now, I hear, obviously AKS, that managed service version, if you like, of Kubernetes is really Microsoft trying to abstract the complexities from running your own Kubernetes environment or your own Kubernetes cluster. So I suppose it's taking that one step up. So what we're going to look at, you mentioned CAF and WAF then, Kev. I mean, in terms of the cloud adoption framework, I know and I'm aware of things like the landing zone infrastructure and how we deploy I suppose landing zones that can be neatly hooked together within a customer set of subscriptions in Azure. Are you telling me this Bicep Accelerator has been kind of designed and developed with those things in mind?
Totally, from the ground up, right? So we're obviously big fans of enterprise scale, right, and the reference architecture that we've got in place. And that's like deploying our shared central services to our landing zones, and that's exactly what this is, right? It's a landing zone, effectively for deploying AKS, against those well architected frameworks and cloud adoption framework practices.
Good stuff. Yeah, shall we get into it then, Kev? I mean, it sounds great. Looking forward to seeing this.
Let's go. So, first of all, I'm just going to bring up the GitHub page, right, of the AKS construct, right? So this is where you can go navigate to, and the team. Shout out to Gordon Byers, by the way, right? Gordon's helped me out massively, right, with bringing me up to speed on this and everything else. But when I first saw this internally, I was just like blown away by it, because it just made a complicated task very simple. If that makes sense, right? And it's all done via code, and there's a couple of options on how far you want to go down the rabbit hole, right? And we'll get onto that shortly. So if you go to GitHub/Azure/AKS construct, you'll be presented at the AKS Bicep Accelerator page. So effectively, the AKS Bicep Accelerator, building Kubernetes clusters can be hard work, right? Especially when you're starting out. I know I have, right? I've bitten off more than I can chew, right? Going down my Kubernetes journey, right? So, do you start with IaaS, right? Do I build my clusters on a Linux VM? How do I protect that, right? Make that highly available. That can be quite daunting, right? And quite intimidating at first. And I might not necessarily have the knowledge to maintain that at the beginning. Whereas if you look at the rest of our, we've done this in other areas in Azure as well. So if we talk about our PaaS offerings, so our platform as a service offerings, or our hybrid, as I like to call them, right? So if you look at like managed instance, for instance, in SQL, we'll give you a set of guidelines and principles to work to increase the SLA, and we'll help you water and feed that in instance as well. So it makes it easier for you to consume as a service, so you can get on with actually using what it's designed for, right? Or getting those applications out there, right? And getting those nodes and those clusters up and running. So yeah, that's what the AKS Bicep Accelerator focuses on, right? It's getting you there as quickly as possible and getting you an environment deployed into Azure.
It's like you say, Kevin. I think from the terms of building a Kubernetes cluster. Now, absolutely, if you want to learn, from the ground up, because I understand the different roles, and you've got to have kind of like I forget what it's called now with Kubernetes, but like that control plane, effectively, that
Correct.
VM that is literally just managing the other VMs. I suppose there's great learnings there if you want to do that, and I've seen some people do it brilliantly well with a stack of Raspberry Pis, actual physical kit.
Totally.
And it looks really interesting. But what we're saying here is AKS is that hardware effectively abstracted away to a managed service that Microsoft offers in Azure. Is that right, Kev?
That's correct. Yeah, it's compute at the end of the day, right? So it's quite a contentious subject, but AKS is an IaaS service, and IaaS is infrastructure as a service, right? But it's more managed, right? So
yeah, I'm with you.
You select the versions and all the constructs of that. I mean, it's really great, and we're going to get into this. You mentioned about people having Raspberry Pis on their desk and everything. Well, what happens if you ain't got the room, right, or the money to put down on hardware like that? Then you can come in here, right, and get a free account spun up and deploy a dev version of this, right? So you can start practicing those builds and those dev builds, right? So get you up and running as well.
Awesome.
So basically it's split up into three components, right? So the way I like to look at it is like level 100, 200, and 300, as we call it. The higher the number, the more down the rabbit hole you go, right? The more complex, but more customizable it is. So we're going to do the wizard parameter configuration today, right? Which is basically, it talks you through the options, and then we're going to generate some Azure CLI code that interfaces with Bicep and then deploys it into an Azure environment, and we're going to go through that process.
Cool.
So we've got our reference architecture here. So as you can see here, enterprise scale comes up over and over again, right? It's our reference architecture, our guidelines, yeah, on best practices of building out your data center in Azure. We've got a sandbox environment. We've got a corporate connected to an existing hub. So if we talk about a hub and topology, right? So back to our shared central services. And then we've got, born in the cloud, right? So online, internet facing, it's just a VNet, and it's going to be exposed to the internet, right? Either through Azure Firewall or some sort of web application firewall gateway as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can also, we're providing the Bicep files here. We'll roughly go over them as well. We're not going to go into too much detail about that, but we've obviously got the Bicep files there. And then we've got obviously YAML files as well to build those pipelines in either Azure DevOps or using GitHub.
Okay, cool.
So getting started. So if you come down to the getting started page, it's number 1, use a deployment helper, right? That's what we're going to go through. So if I click that, it's going to come up with this interface, right? Which has been written by the team.
That's cool.
It's going to walk us through, right? Setting up our parameters basically to get that deployed. So what we've got in here is, we're going to provide the requirements effectively to build our cluster.
Right, with you.
So we've got a simple bare bones cluster, right? I just want to get it up and running. I want to see if I can connect to it, kind of thing. So that's an option. And then we've got, middle of the road, I prefer control and community open source solutions, right? So this is going to be more palatable for most people, right, when they're looking at this. So more control around manual upgrades, manual scaling, right, to control those costs or when your workloads fluctuate, right? And then it's about the ingress as well. So looking at Contour, and then for monitoring, looking at Prometheus and Grafana. So Grafana is like, it's hot at the moment, right? Everyone's trying to get into that, and obviously there's an Azure managed service that's just recently been released around Grafana as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then integration to the Docker Hub container registry. So if you want to pull your Docker images from the public registry, then you're able to bring that in, or you can even look at using the Azure Container Registry as well if you want your own private registry for custom images. Yeah. And then there's a completely managed environment, right? So imagine you're like, I need as much help as I can get, right? This is the start of my journey kind of thing. So I want it to auto scale. So as soon as compute demands go up, it starts scaling out. I want it to auto upgrade so that the Kubernetes version's being upgraded on the nodes. And again, I want to use Azure Monitor for containers. I'm going to use Azure Container Registry, and I'm going to use an Azure App Gateway Ingress controller as well, right? So protecting it with PaaS offerings. So we're just wrapping this up, right, with all this management and monitoring.
I can start to see how this is getting built up then. So effectively, these are going to be the components that are going to be, the code is going to be generating to push into your subscription, I presume.
Correct, yeah. So you can also see here on the top right as well, use this if you're following enterprise scale, right?
Okay, yeah.
So hopefully everyone out there is using some sort of enterprise scale reference architecture, right?
Yeah.
And if we click that,
okay, you get
presented with a different screen, right?
And
we've got Sandbox, Corp, and Online, right?
Okay,
and we've obviously got the the different bits and pieces around, like a bit like enterprise scale. We've got small, medium, large. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but we've got example company scenarios. So I've used like the Contoso and Wingtip and all that kind of good stuff. It's the same in here. It's like, well, which one do we fit in, right? And we're presenting an out-the-box solution, basically.
So I don't expect you to know this, Kev, but you've got the Sandbox, Corp, and Online, which kind of correlate to the management groups on enterprise scale, don't they?
Correct. That's right, yeah.
Do you know if you can change those, or do you have to stick with that naming convention?
No, it's prescriptive, right? It's the code that's changing. So you can change the names. Maybe you've got your own structure. The thing about enterprise scale reference architecture is it's prescriptive.
Yeah.
Right. So we lay out, like standard names, because I don't know how many scoping calls you've ever been in, John. The hardest thing that slows people down is the naming convention.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Yeah. That's right. No, that's right. So what you're saying then, this will generate it using that, because look, we've got to have a baseline. Essentially, we're not going to know what everybody's management group structure may be like, even though they may be following enterprise scale. But I guess you can go back in. Maybe we'll see that in a second, where we can just change it in. We won't do it. We will not bother the demo. But I'm guessing you could change that management group's name so that it goes into the name that you want it to potentially. But no, just as I saw it there, I thought, but yeah, that makes sense. No, that's cool.
So what we're going to do is actually deploy this outside of if we were going to deploy it against enterprise scale, right? Because I don't have an enterprise scale environment deployed. So I'm going to prefer a controlled and community open source solution. That's what I'm going to go for. And then we're going to go down to our security principles. So you can deploy one with a simple cluster with no additional access and limitations. So it may be a good idea if you're just trying stuff out, right? And you don't really, you're still on that discovery journey of learning how the security mechanisms work in Azure, right? So it's a good place to start, but I wouldn't recommend it moving forward because security is a priority, right? Mm-hmm. And then we've got cluster with additional security controls. So we're talking Azure Active Directory integration. So using managed identities, right? And that's critical. Yeah. If we're looking at our WAF principles, we want to audit pod security against baseline standards. We want to control east and west traffic control inside the cluster as well, right? Mm-hmm. So again, like enterprise scale, we've got our north and south traffic that we want to protect, right, coming into the environment, but we also want to zero trust basically between, resources that may be on one end of a spoke to the other, right? We want to control that even at this level. And then we want to authorize IP address ranges, right? Because as we know, when things get deployed with a PIP or have external access, unfortunately, most of the time it's on an any rule, right, on the NSG or even on the resource itself, So setting it to a secure IP address is going to be, reducing that attack surface for people to be able to access it. Mm-hmm. And then you can go one step further, right, if you're hardcore, right? And this is where, people should be aiming for, right, is a private cluster with isolated networking controls, right? So imagine you had like a PCI compliance environment, that kind of thing. We're talking, we're going to be using the, Azure Active Directory integration. We're going to be enforcing pod security baselines. We're definitely going to be controlling east and west traffic. It's going to be a private cluster. We're going to restrict dependencies with private link, right? And then we're going to restrict egress traffic with Azure Firewall. So we're going to go all guns blazing, right, and really wrap this up. No, and then we're going to store Kubernetes secrets in Azure Key Vault.
I mean, it's great to see the different options, though. It's so dependent on your own maturity with your understanding of this, the platform, with the Azure platform and the wider components that would go into a solution like this. It's great to see that you can kind of pick the one that, I guess, closely follows where you might want to start with.
Correct. So if we scroll down a little bit further, what we end up with some of the options we've just selected is what our deployment's going to look like. Right.
Okay.
So what we've got here is we've got a couple of tabs here. Can you see that? It's deploy, cluster details, add-on details, networking details, and sample apps, right? To see you can deploy a sample app if you want, right? To see if it's running. But what we're going to do today is we're going to authenticate with the cluster at the end and then just bring up a list of the nodes that are running. So cluster name, right? I mean, I just leave this as default. I don't know if you've ever seen the quirkiness, right, when you're deploying nodes, but they generate the names, they start using Greek mythology and stuff like that. So you can come in here and change the name against your naming convention, right? Again, the resource group, we've got to land our resources somewhere, right? We're going to be sticking it in some sort of resource group.
Yeah,
and then we've got the Kubernetes version, right? So you can select this if you've got certain compliance or compatibility requirements, but we're just going to go with the current general available version here. Then we've got our location as well. So our regions, obviously from compliancy or, if we want the shortest path, should we say. So you need to get access to this. So try and pick the region that's closest to you. Or if you've got data sovereignty compliance rules, then you stick it in the right region. So we're going to stick this in West Europe today, right? But here's a list of the supported regions at the moment, right, of where this can be deployed. Then if we come over here, it's going to basically environment access and build agents. So it's already picked up my home IP address, right? So
Okay. Yeah.
this isn't static, so hopefully, right, I'm not going to get DDoS off the back of this video, right? I'm going to reboot the router after this, right?
Yeah, you'll have to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Quick, mask it out.
Yeah, right. So this picks up an IP address. So if you're on-prem, you're on site, right, or whatever, it's going to go up your express route. It's a bit like the whitelist that you'd have in the NSG for the management access on your IaaS. We're also going to have a look at granting AKS cluster admin roles. So assign the deployment user cluster admin. So it's going to grab my user identity, right, and give it cluster admin. If you don't know what cluster admin is, it's like God mode, basically, right?
Yeah.
So I can make these administration changes afterwards. And then add the current IP to the AKS firewall, right? So if we come back up to here, it's got my IP address there. It's going to add that to the firewall to allow me to get access to it.
Got you. Okay.
I'm going to deploy a container registry as well, so ACR. It's going to assign me the push role, right? So when we break that down a little bit, there's different roles for the registry because we obviously want to protect our images, right? Because our images are effectively miniature operating systems, yeah, plus the dependency to run that application. So there's push, there's pull, there's those kind of things. So it's going to give me the push role, right? Because it needs to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And then we're going to deploy Azure Key Vault as this as well to keep our secrets in there. So we've got we're going to grant the secret officer role to grant access to that Key Vault as well. And yeah, we're going to assign the deployment user the certificate and secret officer. So I'll be able to have access to that so that my AKS instance can then speak to the Key Vault as part of the deployment process.
With you. Yeah. Understood.
Cool. So we go over to cluster details. And this is where you get into the nitty gritty, right, of the scalable options that are available. So
yeah, I guess, how much Kubernetes knowledge would you say you need to kind of be aware of? I guess you're going to need some basic level understanding to get into this to start off with. But I mean, just looking at some of the options, they seem relatively intuitive as to what they are. But what's your take on that, Kev?
So if you're used to scaling resources in Azure or PaaS services, if you look at web apps, right, you're going to start to see the same kind of scaling logic, right? It's always out or up, right? So it is quite intuitive. A lot of this is backed by docs as well. If you've seen on the page, there's always a link to the docs page as well to get some more context on it. So if you're too unsure, right, you can go off and read the MS docs about particular items in this wizard as well.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
So we've got a couple of options. We've got free cluster, right, service with a service level objective of 99.5%. So this would be great for dev, demos, POCs, right? Just want to get something up there, but isn't mission critical. We can then go up a step further, right, and start using availability zones, right? So it falls into the IaaS category, right? So if we were talking about VMs, right, and we had them in a particular region, we want them to be spread over different zones so one data center got took out, right, or went down, then it would be replicated to another, right? So again, with our storage, our compute, etc., we'd be looking at zones.
Yeah.
And we can, start bringing that service level agreement up. System pool types. So if we wanted to, we could have a separate system and user workload type. Now, I believe this is quite common practice in the industry, right? Because you obviously want your controller nodes basically to be separate from your application nodes, etc. So you can do that here, but we're just going to deploy a cost optimized one, right? So if you're starting out, you can group these together.
With you, yeah.
And then we can start looking at the type of VMs that we're using, right? So a standard user, 4 core VMs with 2 to 3 node autoscale. So again, it's the same logic, right? We're going to be running this on, it's abstracted away, like we said, because it's a managed service.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's still running on IaaS compute, right? But Microsoft is taking care of that in the background. We've got scale types here. We've got manual. We're going to stick on manual for now because we're not going to drive any workloads on this. But you can, if you select auto scale, we can bring up a node count range of 3 up to the maximum of 20. We're just going to have this on manual for now. And then the compute type is general purpose. Now, I believe well, not on this one, but maybe on one of the other configurations, right, that we're previously on, you can go to IO optimized and GPO workloads, right?
Okay.
That will be specific on region as well.
Yeah, understood. Yeah.
So
that's just for the availability for those types of resources in those, that I got you.
Correct.
Understood.
So you might struggle with UK West, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Scaling up, right?
So, yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, that's just down the road from me. That is, Kevin. Yeah, I've been in there.
I know where it is, exactly where it is.
Yeah,
I can't tell you, but yeah.
Well, it's not difficult to find. I think I drove past. Right? Yeah. I took a picture of it, and somebody commented, "Oh, maybe you shouldn't be doing that." It's like, well, it's not a Microsoft-owned building. At the end of the day, it's a shared data center, isn't it? But anyway, there we go. We got for now. For now, I noticed it pop up there. UK South too. I wonder what that could be.
Yeah.
But cool.
So we've got our node size here, right? And we've got a couple of options in here. So it's a bit like if you were choosing a VM, right? We're going to just go for 4 cores here and 14 gig of RAM and a 28 gig SSD, right? And we've got our IOPS count. So depending on your demand and your workload, you can obviously pick the different compute configuration that you've got going on.
Yeah.
But we're just going to keep it at that. We've also got Infernal, so people don't know what that is. Again, with this architecture, right, Kubernetes being in the nature it is, it's like, I don't care if it gets burnt down, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can rebuild it, and that's the way it should be treated, So it's not persistent.
It's quite cool seeing those ephemeral disks now coming into play a bit more, because they're the disks that spin up with the VM. They're like temporary storage, aren't they, Kev? They only exist for as long as that VM is running.
Yeah, so which produces a lower cost, right?
So and as I understand it, they're quite fast disks as well.
Yeah. So they're like, you're burning the candles at both ends, as I like to call it, right? But you're burning twice as bright. So there's user cases for it, and it's great. I've seen it a lot with AVD as well. So
that's right. Yeah.
Multi-session host pools. If we go down that tangent for a little second, I want to build those hosts in the morning and then, tear them down at night, right, to save money. So using that user case story is really good. But we've also got persistent storage here, right, if you need something to be, ready to go and safeguarded and backed by SLAs, etc.
Mm-hmm.
We've also got then zone support. So again, it's the same rules apply, right, when we're talking about IaaS compute. Deploying it into multiple availability zones, right? It's going to give you a higher level of availability and protect you against hardware failures, because, we've all worked in those data centers, John. I know I have, right? And done that 3 o'clock in the morning. Switches go down, network equipment goes down, right? Or someone spills, the air conditioning unit goes down across the rack, right? So some things are out of control, right? Even the best run data centers in the world. So having your infrastructure across multiple zones is going to put you in good stead, right? So we can deploy my control plane and nodes across zones 1, 2, and 3. As you can probably well imagine, right? Zone 1 gets rammed in every data center because it's the default option.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably worth pointing out those availability zones from a Microsoft perspective, because they do, not every data center is capable of hosting equipment in different availability zones, but you do get the option for quite a lot, depending on the data center. You get the option to choose VMs typically and other infrastructure. Where do you want to place that? And I suppose it's physically separated hardware is what we're saying, isn't it? These are effectively
totally in a different building. It's a distance from the other data center, etc. If we talk about regions, right, mirrored regions. So if we look at North Europe and West Europe, they're mirrored regions. So they've got the same zones, the same SKUs. You could fail over from one region to another, right? If you wanted to go up to that next level, of high availability. But you're right, John. Just to call out. Check your region, right, and check if that data center is. Our data centers are always scaling up, John. They're never getting smaller.
Yeah,
but as you can imagine, right, it takes time to get those rolled out. So,
but it's an important point to note, though, because I guess people new to Azure, new to a cloud platform, might think, "Oh, I can put it wherever I like." But it's an important thing to realize that not all data centers are alike. So, you kind of do need to dig into that if you want to go down that rabbit hole, I suppose, isn't it? It's probably a good point to mention there anyway.
Totally. It's the shared responsibility model as well, right? Because people think, I can set something in the cloud, it's bulletproof. Well, in most situations, right, you probably are in a better off having it with a CSP, right? So a cloud solution provider, but you've got to architect it in the right way. So if if it's a mission critical system, or a service, you've still got to architect it in the right way and look at these different options that we've just mentioned. So if we go down to cluster upgrades, we're just going to disable auto upgrades, right? Because it's a demo, but we've got built again, like virtual machines, right? Patching's critical, for security, right? Or functionality. So auto upgrade to the latest supported patch version when it becomes available, keeping the mind of versions the same. So you can get quite granular with this, right? Depending on what situation you've got. There's stable, so auto patch the cluster to the latest supported patch release on a minor version. So, one behind, etc. Or then there's rapid, right? You just don't want to be compromised, right? And just go roll with the punches, so to say, right? Give me the latest, right? And I want it yesterday, right? Because I just can't be compromised. Get those patches in. Or, node image, auto upgrade the cluster node images to the latest version available as well. So you've got all these different options to sort of get you up and running. And like you said, like people coming into this, they'll be like, what's this? Well, it's like I've learned one thing and now I've got to go and learn these other bits and pieces. Right?
Yeah, but it's like you say though, Kevin. Is that like now we're spinning this up just to get to grips with what this wizard is doing for us, and we can leave it disabled to begin, but we can click on that docs article and just see those subtle differences between what is the difference between stable and rapid. What does that actually mean? I think we can probably guess to a point, but we've got the docs articles there that will go into that, and it's more good info, to kind of, and I guess it's going to help us when we maybe get a little bit more mature with where we don't need to use maybe this wizard, we can move on to the next stage. These kind of things are going to help us learn. Okay, well, actually, do I want that as a rapid auto upgrade, or do I just want to use that as a node image? Whatever those differences may be, it'll help us learn those things, and it's a good thing to. It's almost like holding our hand, isn't it, with telling us what these capabilities are. Yeah, I like it.
You don't know what you don't know, right?
Exactly.
And if you go through this, you can go, oh, I need to go and look at that.
Yeah,
you're expanding your scope.
Cool.
So, just going to come down to here. So cluster user authentication, you can use local Kubernetes authentication, but as I say to all my customers, Azure AD, right? All roads lead to Rome, right? So we can use RBAC, managed identities, and have that automation in place, right? Having an identity provider, right, is critical for security, right, and governance. So having it integrated into AAD for me is essential. Right, but there's going to be user cases out there where, you might not want to do that. We're going to use the subscription tenant, so it's going to we're going to set a subscription context as part of this deployment, John, and it's going to pick up my tenant from that, right?
Okay.
And then the cluster API security. So what we're going to do is you can add a public one with no restrictions. I wouldn't do that. Wouldn't recommend that if I was you, right? Oh, we're going to have a private cluster. But we're going to go for the one in the middle where it's picked up the IP address, right, of the machine.
With you, yeah.
So if we scroll back up, we've got add-on details. So do you require a secure private container registry to store your application images, right? So you can say it can be on Docker Hub, and it'd be like, no, actually, I want Azure Container Registry, right, the basic tier. And authorize my AKS instance to pull those images, right? I'm going to go with that, right? Docker Hub, amazing. Get the image, but you're going to modify it, right? Or you're going to configure it in a certain way. So having that stuff in your own private registry, maybe you're going to build your own images, right? It's good to have that resource on hand.
Yeah, understood.
And then there's 3 tiers, right? With AKS, there's basic, standard, and premium, right? Depending on what your scenario is. So we're just going to go with the basic tier, right? Just to get us up and running. But there's different SLAs, high availability, or throughput requirements based off the back of those as well.
Yeah. Okay.
We can also do create ACR private agent pool, and again, that's one step further that you can go as well. Obviously, you can see here the agent pool, the operating system's Linux, and the agent count that we've got going on there as well.
Okay.
And then the big one is securely exposing your applications, right? Because we obviously need to consume this as a service, right, via layer 7 HTTPS. So there's a couple of options. You can say, no, I don't need a proxy. I will configure my own solution. So maybe you've got a third-party solution that you're going to be using. Or you can use, I want to use Azure Managed Application Gateway, right? So the Web Application Firewall. It's very popular. You've seen that in the wild quite a lot, right? And that's a PaaS managed service, and that scales. Or I want to deploy Contour, right? So we're going to be looking at, an open source solution where I'm going to expose my apps using this open source technology. And, it needs no introduction, right? I want to use Nginx to deploy my cluster and expose my apps to the internet, right, using Nginx.
Okay, got you, yeah.
And then we can also, we're not going to do this today, but we can create fully qualified domain name URLs so they can be exposed as well. So using external DNS and setting up basically an Azure DNS zone, right, to get that mapping in place.
Okay, yeah.
Or we can run a proxy on every node, right, and deploy the daemon set for that. But what we're going to do is just stick with the default. We're going to use Contour for today.
Okay.
Then cluster and management. This is obviously, we're going to monitor our platforms, right? It's big. A lot of customers are going to be using Azure Monitor for containers, right? Or just Azure Monitor in general. So maybe you want to stick with that. Or very hot off the press, can you use Prometheus / Grafana, Helm chart metrics, right? And that's very popular using AKS or Kubernetes as well. So
yeah.
We're going to just leave that for that. And then Azure Policy, right? And this is what comes back to that, well-architected framework and cloud adoption framework and enterprise scale. Azure Policy makes people's lives so much easier, right? And controlling their environment, right? And pushing out those policies to management groups and subsequent subscriptions. Yes. So for this, we're going to just create one called Audit Non-Compliant. So anything falls short, we'll be made aware of it. So I don't know if folks have been in the Azure Policy portal, but when something's not compliant, it'll come up. Say it needs remediation tasks to bring that up to compliance.
Yeah.
Cool. We're going to go down to network policies. And we've got east-west traffic restrictions. So like I said, we've protected our north and south and our egress and ingress, but we also want to protect the traffic between the nodes and the clusters, right? Okay. So zero trust. Just because you're my neighbor doesn't mean I trust you, right?
Yeah,
it's critical.
No, absolutely.
So we're going to be introducing a network policy add-on to basically help us secure that with network policy objects.
Cool. Okay.
And then our CSI secrets, right? So you bear with me. So the container storage interface, right? We want those to be protected as well. So provision a new Azure Key Vault and enable the secret store CSS driver. So the cluster can speak to that, right? And protect that storage as well. And then network details. So there's a couple of options. We can use Cubenet, which is basically, the default standard in Kubernetes. Now, the difference between Cubenet and Cni is, bear with me. So by default, AKS clusters use Cubenet, and a virtual network and subnet are created for you. But with Cubenet, nodes get an IP address from a virtual network subnet, right? But with a CNI, right, which is the container network interface, network address and translation, NAT, right, is then configured on the nodes, and the pods receive an IP address hidden behind the node IP address. And this approach reduces the number of IP addresses that you need. So if we're talking about, when we're planning out our environment, right, and we're carving out all our IP addresses, and we want to be efficient with our IP addresses, etc., maybe that's going to be a better option, right?
Yeah.
So what we're going to use is we're going to use CNI today. And then if we really wanted to go all guns blazing, but we just don't have time because it takes a while to deploy, we can deploy Azure Firewall, right, as the next hop.
Yeah.
So using that egress. We can use private IP addresses as well to protect the private IP addresses from our VNet. So imagine we just want to access this internally and we don't want it exposed on the internet. We can enable private link. And we can also use the mighty Azure Bastion to facilitate RDP/SSH public internet access into it, right, which is critical.
That's cool. Yeah, it's all baked in as well into this wizard, which is great to see. You can deploy it all in one fell swoop. Yeah, with you.
What we're going to do is just access it from the CLI because it's a demo.
Yeah,
but I'd always recommend Azure Bastion, right, if you want to be, because it's over HTTPS and it's managed by RBAC then, right, to remotely accessing.
Yes. Yeah. Cool.
So as you can see here, we've got a couple of networking options. We've got default networking, right? So it goes away, creates you a new dedicated VNet with private IP range and your agent nodes. It basically sets everything up, right, with a standard load balancer. We've got custom networking, which we're going to do today. And in here, we can set our CEDAR ranges for our VNet, our AKS node subnet, right? So what subnet range they're going to be on. And we can also do stuff like the service network and the DNS service IP address. Now, if we enabled stuff like Azure Firewall, we'd be able to come in here as well and make those changes as part of the deployment.
And if you'd have done the ACR private agent pool as well, same again, I can see that there.
Yeah, so same with Azure Bastion. You need a dedicated subnet, right, for that. So create an Azure Bastion subnet in there. And then this is new. I don't think it's live yet, but bring your own VNet, right? So imagine you've got a landing zone already there, John, right? Already set up with a VNet. You can then attach this to that VNet. And
do you know what? That's really interesting. So I know a lot of SD-WAN products, third-party products, like Meraki, Cisco Meraki, they deploy, manage their own VNets for obviously from a networking perspective. So it's that question that you hit quite often actually with Azure with infrastructure as code is that actually I've got a product that's deploying a certain level of element of infrastructure for me, like my VNets for argument's sake. I just want to deploy into those VNets. So that's really cool to see actually that those what have been seen as quite little niggly issues, I think, for deployment. If you're doing it, what I mean by that is if you're doing a deployment via infrastructure as code, but you've already got a VNet that you want to deploy into, things like Terraform, how do you get that Terraform code to recognize that VNet? There are some roadblocks, I suppose, but to me, that's what this is screaming out for. It's kind of given us that option to now start to think about that, which is cool.
Well, with Terraform, you can do that, but you have to write more code for it, right? So
exactly, yeah.
It's like a data import. So I've got this existing infrastructure. I just want to deploy on top of it, right? And these tools do a lookup basically. That exists. I'm going to attach the resources to that VNet.
So that's effectively what this potentially is going to be doing then, is just saying, right, okay, you've got an existing. Cool. Like it.
But we're just going to go with a custom one right today.
Yeah.
And then we've got some sample apps here as well, right? So once you've deployed it, you can put a sample app on it and get yourself up and running, right? And again, you could do this off the Docker Hub as well. There's external apps there as well, just like Hello World, or the famous cats and dogs. I don't know if you've ever done that one.
No, I don't think I have actually. No.
Microsoft have a MS Docs or an MS Learn path, right? And it gets you up and running with Kubernetes. And the app that they've got in there is basically a website, John. It's hilarious. And
okay.
You vote if you like cats, or you vote if you like dogs, right? But it's proven the process. So we've got all that. If we go back to deploy, as you can see here, it's generated off the back of those options. It's generated this script basically to get it deployed.
Okay.
Right, and it's powered by Bicep to do this, right? And then we can also add stuff in like post configuration, right?
Okay.
So start doing that guest configuration, and then there's the template file for the CI/CD, right? So we've also got that to reference as well. But what we're going to do is just do the CLI version today.
Cool. Okay.
Right, so let's get on with it. So
It's good to have all that background, though, isn't it? I think it's good to walk through all the options that you potentially got to do, and then you can see how comparatively simple using code is. I guess I say that with like I'm the world's greatest developer, but what I mean by that is that all of those really complex things can be put into a wizard and generate the script that you need. And now hopefully it gives you that leg up to understand what this script is actually trying to do, so that you learn more, basically.
Exactly. It's about getting you going.
Yeah.
Right? Because, like I said, if you don't know, you don't know. And it's difficult,
exactly.
especially when you start seeing all this code, right, being Bicep, right, or Terraform, and you're like, I'm starting out on this journey. How do I even get there, right?
But that's it. It's the Bicep. It's the AKS Bicep Accelerator, and this is the whole point. So it's just great to see how it's working. So yeah.
So what I've literally done is, if we go back to the portal, where is it? I've copied this across right into VS Code, right, to structure out for our demo. But what I've also done is I've included a few other things, so we're going to go over that, right? So here's the Bicep configuration, right, that the team's written, and this is a rabbit hole. I'm going to be completely honest with you, right?
Fair enough.
But again, we've got our networking, right? It's all split up. So you can modify this to fit your environment to get it deployed. And this is how it would natively look, right? Got networking, etc. And it goes on. It's quite. It's quite.
I can see just on the right-hand side there, on the right-hand side, just the it's a hefty Bicep file, that is, yeah.
So we've also got our pipelines that we've made available as well, that were on the GitHub page, right? So to get your pipeline up and running to deploy the Bicep code, right, using DevOps at GitHub. So we've got a standard CI, we've got that bring your own VNet private, that we were talking about, private integration one as well. And then we've got, I think that might be just like an open one. So bring your own VNet, but not with the private endpoints. So we've got a few options there for people to look at. But we're going to go back to the Azure CLI command. So what we're going to do, I'm going to log into Azure now, right? I'm going to then, through the Azure CLI, I'm using Windows Subsystem for Linux to do this, right? So it's my integrated bash terminal. And we're going to set the subscription context, right? And then we're going to start deploying some stuff. So, do an easy login. Bear with me while I do this off screen. Right, that's logged me in. Then I'm going to set the subscription context. So I've got a dev subscription, right? I'm going to go into this. So that's set. So when I start working with the Azure CLI, it knows, right, I know what tenant I'm in because I've logged in interactively with my credentials. And I know what subscription I'm going to deploy to because I've set this subscription, right?
Yes.
So now we're going to just deploy a resource group. So I'm going to run inline terminal. And voila, I've deployed a resource group. That's how quick it's done. That used to be a lot longer. And now we're going to deploy our AKS instance. Now that's spinning that up in my terminal below.
It's interesting to see how long that might take then. So that is, what is that spinning up exactly then, looking at that? So we've got our AKS cluster, we've got our VNet, we've got our security that's been strapped around it, our Azure Policy, our key vaults. Right? We're setting up the roles, and we're also going to be integrating with AAD as well. So it's doing that in what, a dozen lines of
correct.
Code,
so all that Bicep code, right? Yeah, obviously it's going to be customized with the options that we've set, right? But it's there's enough. There's half a page of code there, right, to get you up and running.
Yeah, exactly.
So the Bicep stuff's running around in the background now, speaking to Azure and getting that deployed into my environment.
Good to see. Do you know how long this normally takes, Kev? Is it a
5 or 10 minutes?
Should we pause for a minute and come back when it's done?
Yeah, you edited that out.
No, I could. The power of pause, and we can come straight back.
Bear with me. We get composed.
There we go. Yeah, compose. We're back. There we go. Have a glass of water after that whole millisecond delay there of deploying infrastructure.
I know I said 10 minutes, right? It smashed it out in like 2. So
that's not bad. That was good going. Yeah.
No, it was. So you can see here, right? If I bring up the terminal a little bit more, we can see everything's been deployed. Like, look at all that. I mean, I'm not going to scroll all the way to the top, right? Because we'll be there for quite a while. But yeah, it's deployed all our resources. So if I come back to the bottom. Right.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do now is I'm going to grab the credentials to get in from AAD. So what I've got here is, and this is using, like we said, the deployment. It's already done the service identity piece, right? The managed identity. So it's grabbed my Azure AD login. It's associated with it, right? I'm on the trusted IP address list, right, to get into the controller, etc. So we're just going to grab that. So, yeah, I'm just going to overwrite that because I've already got this before. Again. Right. Okay, cool. So I've imported that into my running terminal, basically. Now, he says, hopefully this should work, John.
The moment of truth. Let's see what's running on there. Sign in first.
Always, right. So let me grab that. Bear with me, folks, while I log in.
It's quite a cool authentication mechanism that they have with things like this anyway, where they just fire up a browser window. You get to paste your code in, then it just authenticates back to your terminal, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, this now is asking for my device code, but it's actually gone one step further, and it's getting me to go in with MFA.
Ah, okay. Yeah, there we go. It just goes to show how nice and secure these things are, especially when you're using.
So I've just got to take my phone off flight mode so I can get this notification in. Right. Okay, where am I? Proof sign in. Are you trying to sign into the Azure Kubernetes service? Yes.
And there we go.
Voila.
Wow. There we go.
And that's us. And we can see here that our nodes are up.
So you've effectively just got kick-started with an Azure Kubernetes service cluster to your configuration, to what you understand or what you feel that you need to move forward with. So they're just the nodes that are running on there. Then they're the 3 nodes plus the system nodes. We didn't deploy a sample app, did we, with the wizard?
No, not at this moment in time. But yeah, that would be the next stage. But if I bring up my other screen and I go to the resource group that we've just deployed, here's the resources that we've deployed. So we've got the Kubernetes cluster, we've got the container registry, we've got the managed identity, right? That's how I've just authenticated in. I've got my key vault, and I've got my virtual network that's deployed. And it was all deployed in West Europe as well. And then
that's awesome stuff.
It's great, right? I was blown away. I was like, we should do this with other stuff, right? And that's happening, John.
No, absolutely. And it's the way of the world, yeah. I mean, in terms of infrastructure as code, it's just great that you can use a wizard to generate your AZ CLI to go and do that within, I know we've taken, 15 minutes or so to kind of talk through it all because we just want to understand what the options are, which is great. But I'm guessing you could be up and running within 5 minutes here, if, judging by the time it took to deploy that then, and start looking at deploying. Are we at the end of it there then, Kev? I
Yeah,
presume
we
there's
are,
nothing
yeah,
else
well,
to show. Well, let's head back on over
no.
to our camera. But that was great. I mean, it's really, it's enlightened me now with the ease of trying to get started. It's great to see that the team have developed that Bicep Accelerator for AKS. And thanks for talking me through it there, Kev. I think it's a great little service there to help people, like you say, get started with AKS and really get their first cluster up and running, and maybe look to deploy some of those sample apps and learn a little bit more.
Correct, yeah. I mean, get yourself a Hello World app up and running on there and push an image to it, yeah, and go through the whole mechanism of that.
Good stuff. Well, we've reached the end of the video then, so thanks so much, Kev. Really is appreciated to give up your time and come and school me in something today. So I've certainly learned something today. As I say, every day is a school day, and it continues to be so in this industry at the moment, doesn't it? So, but look, thanks. Lovely to speak to you again, obviously, and thanks for coming on and taking me through that, buddy.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, John.
See you very soon. Thanks, buddy. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.